Hello, everybody, boys and girls, those who bounce in between. It's Comrade Danky here with another update over the impending war with Iran that started yesterday when President Trump ordered an airstrike against Qasem Soleimani, an Iranian general, commander of the Quds Force. And this is the Iraqi Prime Minister saying that the United States killing of Iranian commander will light the fuse of war. This is from al-Arabia.net. This was published today. So, Iraq's Prime Minister condemned on Friday the U.S. killing of Iranian Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani and Iraqi militia commander Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes and said it would light the fuse of war. The United States killed Soleimani, head of the elite Quds Force and architect of Iran's spreading military influence in the Middle East, in a strike at Baghdad airport. Mohandes, an advisor to Soleimani, was also killed. The assassination of Iraqi military commander who holds an official position is considered aggression on Iraq, and the liquidation of leading Iraqi figures or those from a brotherly country of Iraqi soil is a massive breach in sovereignty, Iraqi Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi said. Abdul Mahdi, whose government is the backing of Iran, said in a statement the U.S. airstrike was a, quote, dangerous escalation that will light the fuse of a destructive war in Iraq, the region, and the world. The Prime Minister resigned in November due to anti-government protests, but remains in office in a caretaker capacity. At least 450 people have been killed in the unrest, some of which was driven by anger at Iranian influence in Iraq. The Prime Minister said the U.S. strike violated terms of the U.S. military presence in Iraq, adding that U.S. troops were exclusively in Iraq to train Iraqi security forces and fight ISIS within the framework of a global coalition. Abdul Mahdi called on Parliament to convene an extraordinary session to, quote, take legislative steps and necessary provisions to safeguard Iraq's dignity, security, and sovereignty. He did not specify what those provisions would entail, but some officials and parliamentarians have called for steps to expel U.S. troops from Iraq. Abdul Mahdi, whose government has support from Iran and Tehran's backed Iraqi allies, described Soleimani and Mohandes as, quote, huge symbols of the victory against ISIS terrorists. Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces, a grouping of mostly Iran-backed Shiite militias led by Mohandes, helped security forces retake a third of Iraq from ISIS. The grouping's troops were later incorporated into Iraq's official armed forces. So, I've received a lot of comments on my previous video about this. It was largely me reacting to the news as I heard it. That was a straight off the dome reaction. But I also had people saying that I was blowing this way out of proportion, that this isn't going to affect Americans. And my whole response to that is, first of all, you have the Prime Minister of Iraq here saying this has the potential to bleed into a world war. He said it right here. And secondly, I don't give a flying fuck even if, by some weird magic, 0 Americans were affected by this. This affects other people too. I don't just care about Americans. I care about people living in the Middle East. I care about people living all over the world. So obviously I'm going to be distraught when I see that another war, another US imperialist war, has been triggered at the behest of that orange dipshit clown, Donald Trump. So here is an article from BuzzFeed News. It says, the U.S. didn't warn Britain or its other European allies ahead of the planned airstrike to kill Iran's top military commander. In recent days, allies were being kept in the dark by the Trump administration, a senior diplomat from a major EU member told BuzzFeed News. So the UK warned against further conflict between the West and Iran after a U.S. strike that killed the country's top military commander, Qasem Soleimani, on Friday morning. In a statement that did not explicitly back President Donald Trump's decision to order the airstrike that killed the head of Iran's elite Quds Force, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said, "We have always recognized the aggressive threat posed by the Iranian Quds force led by Qasem Soleimani. Following his death, we urge all parties to de-escalate. Further conflict is in none of our interests." The US did not inform the UK that it was planning to assassinate Iran's top military commander in advance of Friday's airstrike, a UK government source said. Prime Minister Boris Johnson was aware of the move against the head of the Quds force, Soleimani, in Baghdad, Iraq, before it took place. Raab spoke with US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo after Soleimani was killed. Britain currently has around 1,400 military personnel in Iraq and Syria. So he says here, discussed with Dominic Raab the recent decision to take defensive action to eliminate Qasem Soleimani. Thankful that our allies recognize the continuing aggressive threats posed by the Iranian Quds force, the US remains committed to de-escalation. The US remains committed to de-escalation? You escalated it! The United States ordered the fucking airstrike. It didn't just magically come out of thin air. Do you honestly expect us to swallow this bullshit? Come on, man. Other US allies were also out of the loop. Several European governments had complained in recent days to US counterparts that up until the attack on the US embassy in Baghdad, allies were being kept in the dark by the Trump administration, a senior diplomat from major EU member told BuzzFeed News. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said that he told Pompeo that the US airstrike, quote, had not made it easier to reduce tensions. So here you have it. A German foreign minister is saying, hey, this isn't the way to de-escalate. Meanwhile, our fucking state secretary is saying the US remains committed to de-escalation. If you really care... Alright, I'm getting upset. If the United States government really cared about de-escalation, they would pull the fuck out of the Middle East. We've been there for almost 20 fucking years now. We've dumped trillions of dollars in our imperialist wars in the Middle East. We just need to leave. We need to let these countries dictate their own lives. These are sovereign countries, are they not? It's time for us to stop playing this little fucking puppet board game where we're trying to control these countries like pieces on a board. Let the Iraqis decide their own fate. Let the Iranians decide their own fate. Stop trying to escalate this into a world fucking war. I mean, what's it gonna be? Is it gonna be like by the time I'm an old fucking man, we're finally gonna be done with these wars in the Middle East? Or is this just going to go on forever? You know, if it's not Qasem Soleimani one day, well then, what excuse are we going to have a decade from now to continue this imperialism in the Middle East? You want to de-escalate the situation in the Middle East, stop supporting Israel, and pull all the fucking troops out. So this is Foreign Minister Heiko Maas. Quote, the U.S. military operation followed a series of dangerous provocations by Iran. However, this action has not made it easier to reduce tensions. I made this point clearly to Secretary Pompeo as well. Further escalation, which could set the whole region on fire, must be prevented. I just discussed this with Secretary Pompeo and Joseph Borrell. We have been in close consultations with Britain and France on how to help calm the situation. Donald Tusk, I almost said Donald Trump. Donald Tusk, the former president of the European Council, said that Trump's decisions provoke global risks. It's not just America that's suffering from Trump's idiocy, it's the entire world. This orange fascist clown has the capacity to set the entire world on fire in terms of a global war. He says, Europe and the US must at all costs maintain transatlantic unity in the face of the approaching political earthquake, regardless of the fact that President Trump's decision provoked global risk and his intentions remain unclear. I wholeheartedly disagree. If there was ever a time for Europe to say, you know what, we will not support this. We will not support US imperialism in Iran. We have to stand against imperialism. This is the Iraq of our generation. This is the Vietnam of our generation. All right, we have to be prepared to stand against it, to march down the streets in anti-war protests. Soleimani, as well as Abdul Mahdi al-Mohandes, deputy commander of Iran-backed militias known as the Popular Mobilization Forces, were killed when rockets destroyed two vehicles traveling near the airport in Baghdad. The Pentagon later confirmed Soleimani's death, saying the airstrike was ordered by Trump in part to deter future Iranian attack plans. The UK military has increased its security and readiness at bases in the Middle East in response. Sky News reported. The U.S. nationals have been urged to leave Iraq immediately in a statement released by the U.S. Embassy. Opposition Labour Party politicians lined up to criticize the U.S. airstrike. Outgoing leader Jeremy Corbyn called it, quote, an extremely serious and dangerous escalation of conflict in the Middle East with global significance, and said, quote, the UK government should urge restraint on the part of both Iran and the US and stand up to the belligerent actions and rhetoric coming from the United States. It's very obvious here that the United States is the aggressor here. We are the ones who have our troops in the Middle East. We are the ones who ordered the airstrike on an Iranian general. It would be the equivalent of the Iranians killing John Bolton. Keir Starmer, a current frontrunner to replace Corbyn, said, this is an extremely serious situation. There is a clear danger of further violence and escalation in the Middle East. We need to engage, not isolate Iran. All sides need to de-escalate tensions and prevent further conflict. Labour MP Lisa Nandy said, this is a very dangerous moment. 17 years after a catastrophic decision to go to war in Iraq, violence still rages every day. World leaders must stand up to Trump. The last thing we need is another all-out war. 17 years, trillions of dollars later, and Iraq is still as unstable as it was. It's even more unstable than it was when before we went in. So what have we actually accomplished there? What has been this entire 17-year endeavor? I'll tell you what it's been. It's been imperialism. We've secured oil, we've secured a puppet government to serve our national interests in Iraq. Labour MP Stella Creasy called for Britain's Parliament, which is currently in recess due until next week, to be recalled to debate the UK response. The Parliament not met until Tuesday, surely unsustainable in such circumstances. Needs urgent statement from PM or Foreign Secretary accordingly, she tweeted. France's EU Minister Émile de Montchalin said Emmanuel Macron's priority was to recreate conditions of stability in the region. This morning we wake up in a more dangerous world because military escalations is always dangerous, she said. Alistair Burt, who served the UK's Minister for the Middle East under Theresa May, warned that the killing of Soleimani had totally unknowable consequences. Quote, direct war has been avoided until now, despite provocations, and all efforts now must be directed to defuse the confrontations at the heart of this. But this incident is unlikely to be the end of it, he said. The UK's former ambassador to Lebanon, Tom Fletcher, called the assassination a massive moment in a series of tweets and said Soleimani had become one of the most powerful figures in the Middle East, certainly more so than bin Laden or Baghdadi at moment of their assassinations. He added, question that U.S. planners must now consider urgently is how to make this look like part of a coherent strategy rather than what otherwise will look like a drive-by adventurism. The last 30 years, even under less erratic leadership, does not provide great reassurance. That's exactly what this is, ladies and gentlemen. This is Trump trying to boost his political ratings, so he orders an airstrike in Iran and posts a picture of the fucking American flag on his Twitter. In response to the U.S.'s airstrike, Iran's foreign minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said the assassination would lead to greater resistance against the U.S. in the Middle East. The brutality and stupidity of American terrorist forces and assassinating Commander Soleimani will undoubtedly make the tree of resistance in the region and the world more prosperous, he said. This is a disaster, ladies and gentlemen. And I have dipshits out there saying, USA, USA, USA. You know, if you're one of those people who is shilling for Trump and you are prepared, well, then you should lock and load and go on the front lines, my friend. But I'm also going to recommend that we send Donald Trump Jr. on the front as well as all the fucking oil barons who are foaming at the mouth over the potential for a war with Iran. Send the rich to fight. Why do they always send the poor? Why do we always have to fight the fucking wars? Anyway, this is horrible. As we've seen, it does have the potential to bleed over into a potentially global conflict. Europe is wavering. They don't know whether to support the US or not, but one thing is clear, that the US is clearly the aggressors in this, and everybody, I guess except Trump, wants to de-escalate the situation. Everybody except Trump and fucking Pompeo. Even though he says the US remains committed to de-escalation. That is the ultimate hypocrisy. The ultimate hypocrisy. Fucking disgraceful.